Story number 1.
It was the kind of trip we always talked about doing but never got around to. Just me, my girlfriend Marcy, and her younger brother Colin. A 3-day road trip through Nevada and down to Arizona, with stops at ghost towns, roadside diners, and whatever weird attractions we stumbled across along the way. Colin was 19, taking a gap year, and we figured it would be a fun way to reconnect before life got busier. Marcy and I had been together for 3 years at that point, and it felt like something lighthearted and spontaneous would do us all some good. We left from Reno in my old Honda CRV, packed tight with snacks, sleeping bags, and a cooler of sodas and sandwiches. It was early June, dry heat but bearable. Our route took us down Route 50, what some call the loneliest road in America. I'd never driven it before, but the appeal was that exact emptiness. Long stretches of nothing, vast, open space. We were halfway between Fallon and Austin, Nevada when we saw the sign. Crescent Flats, 17 miles ahead. None of us had ever heard of it. It wasn't on any of the printed maps we had, and it didn't show up on the GPS either. But the sign looked official, green and white, like any other town marker. "You guys want to check it out?" Colin asked from the back seat. "Could be cool," Marcy shrugged, "if it's only a small detour." So we turned off the main road onto a narrow 2-lane that twisted into the desert like it was trying to disappear. The farther we drove, the more the scenery changed. The hills got steeper, the brush thicker, the sky strangely dim even though the sun hadn't set yet. 17 miles turned into more like 23, and just when we thought we'd have to turn around, the town appeared, Crescent Flats. Calling it a town was generous. It looked more like a cluster of abandoned buildings baking under the desert sun. A boarded-up church, a gas station with no pumps, a general store with shattered windows and sun-bleached mannequins visible through the dust. The only sign of recent activity was a motel at the edge of the dirt road, the Mojave Palms Inn. The sign flickered like it hadn't worked properly in decades, and half the letters were missing or burned out. But the door was open, and a neon vacancy sign glowed weakly in the window. "I thought you said this place wasn't on GPS," I said. Marcy nodded slowly. "It wasn't. Still isn't." "No cell signal either," Colin added, holding up his phone. We parked out front. I had this weird feeling that we were being watched, though I couldn't see anyone. The air was too still, too dry. The motel looked like it had last been cleaned in the 70s, but it was intact. A woman stood behind the front desk, pale, rail-thin, maybe in her 50s, but with long silver hair that made her seem older. She greeted us without much emotion. "Looking for a room?" Just wanted to take a quick look around the town," I said. "Didn't think anyone actually lived out here." She didn't smile. "We don't get many visitors, but we have rooms if you want to rest. Just passing through," Marcy said. "Well," the woman said, voice dry as dust, "you'll want to be out before dark." That made Colin laugh. "Why? Does the boogeyman come out?" Her expression didn't change. "Just best to keep moving." We nodded politely and left. I felt her eyes on us all the way back to the car. We spent maybe half an hour walking around the ghost town. It was eerie how intact everything looked, like people had just walked away mid-conversation. Dishes still sat on some tables in the diner. A newspaper dated May 12, 1963, rested on a cracked bar stool inside the saloon. The pages didn't flutter. There was no wind. "I don't like this," Marcy said quietly as we walked past the schoolhouse. I didn't either. And then we heard the bell. It rang once. Loud. Clear. Coming from the church. We froze. "That's not the wind," I said. "There's someone in there," Colin whispered, pointing to a dark shape moving past one of the stained glass windows. We backed away slowly, but curiosity got the better of Colin. He edged up to the door and peeked in. I pulled him back. "No," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "We're leaving. Now." The car started fine. We turned around, but the road that brought us in, flat, straight, familiar, wasn't there. Instead, the dirt path parred to the right and vanished behind a small ridge. We drove that way, assuming it might have been a side road we missed. But after 10 minutes, we ended up right back in front of the motel. Same angle, same position, same flickering sign. Marcy gasped, "That wasn't a loop." I slammed the wheel. "I swear I took a straight path." "We didn't turn. We never turned," Colin said. I threw the car in reverse and drove backward down the path, eyes locked in the mirrors. But after what felt like 10 straight minutes of driving, the motel appeared again, this time from behind us. "I want to go," Marcy said. "Now." We decided to stop, regroup, and ask the woman at the front desk for help. Maybe there was another road out. But the office was empty. No woman, no register. The desk was covered in dust, thick like no one had touched it in years. The vacancy sign was off. The air smelled of rot. I backed out of the office slowly. Did she even exist? Colin asked. We tried the other buildings, the diner, the gas station, even the schoolhouse. Every single one was empty, abandoned. There were no footsteps in the dirt besides ours. By now, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The air got cold fast. Too fast. We got back to the car and turned the engine on, headlights cutting through the growing dark. But the road out was gone again. This time, all we saw was an endless black stretch of sand and weeds. Then the figures appeared. First just one, standing in the road, then another. And another. Dozens of them. Silhouettes. Tall, still, watching. Their faces weren't visible, just shadowed features like smudged charcoal sketches. But their heads turned when we moved. They stood between us and every possible direction out. I threw the car in drive, heart hammering, and gunned it toward the least crowded stretch. As we passed within feet of the figures, they didn't move, didn't flinch. They just turned to watch us pass. And then, just like that, they were gone. The headlights lit up nothing but empty desert. But Crescent Flats wasn't behind us. It was ahead again. No matter how fast I drove, how many turns we made, it was always ahead, always waiting. Finally, we stopped in front of the motel again, exhausted, defeated. "I think we have to stay the night," Colin said quietly. Marcy shook her head. "I don't want to sleep here. I don't want to close my eyes here." "We don't have a choice," I said. The motel key was already sitting on the hood of our car. Room 6. We hadn't put it there. We stepped inside the room. Same faded carpet, same stale smell. But there were no beds, no lamps, just 3 chairs facing a cracked mirror. The door slammed shut behind us. Colin tried to open it, but the handle spun uselessly. We were locked in, and then we heard it, a whisper from the mirror. First faint, then louder. Not words, just sounds, wet, guttural sounds like someone breathing through cracked ribs. The glass rippled. I grabbed a chair and hurled it into the mirror. It shattered instantly. The sound stopped, and so did the lights. Everything went black. We huddled together, listening for anything. Every second stretched like an hour. And then a voice, right behind me. "Why'd you break it?" I turned. Nothing, but Colin was gone. Marcy screamed. He had been holding her hand. Gone in the space of a breath. We searched the room, the hallway, the parking lot. Nothing. Not a sound, not a trace, just that same endless silence. We stayed in the car the rest of the night, engine running, lights on. At dawn, the road was back, straight, clear, cutting through the desert like it had the day we arrived. We didn't ask questions, just drove. Didn't speak until we hit a gas station 2 hours later. When we asked the clerk about Crescent Flats, he frowned. "That place," he said, "burned down. Long time ago. 63, I think. Whole town went up, nobody made it out." We left without saying a word. That was 3 years ago. Marcy and I aren't together anymore. She doesn't talk about what happened. Neither do I. But I still drive Route 50 sometimes, and sometimes I see that sign again. Crescent Flats, 17 miles ahead. I keep driving, but one night I know I'll see headlights behind me, and this time they won't let me go. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It started as a spontaneous decision between 2 old friends. I hadn't seen Aaron in nearly 5 years, not since we'd finished college and gone our separate ways. Him to Denver, me to Sacramento. We'd kept in touch on and off, usually in bursts. When he texted me in early September asking if I wanted to do a road trip from California to Colorado and take the weird roads instead of the highways, I agreed faster than I should have. I needed a break. Things in my life had felt stagnant. Work stress, a failed relationship, and that restless feeling that creeps up on you when you've been stuck in one place for too long. We planned it out over a few calls. The idea was simple. Drive from Sacramento to Denver over 4 days, avoiding major interstates, sticking to back roads, rural highways, and the occasional dirt path if it meant something offbeat or scenic. Aaron called it our reset trip. He said something about clearing our heads on the road before another long winter. I packed light, grabbed my camera, and drove up to meet him at his parents' cabin in Quincy. where we'd start the trip fresh the next morning. The first day felt like everything a road trip should be. Old music blasting through his truck's speakers, the windows rolled down, laughing about stupid stuff from college, and long stretches of road without a single car in sight. We stopped at weird roadside attractions, an abandoned drive-in theater, a diner with jukeboxes that still worked, even a fake ghost town built in the 60s for a Western movie that was never finished. We slept in a cheap but clean motel that night in Nevada and planned our route through Utah the next day. The second day started to feel a little strange. Somewhere outside Ely, we noticed the GPS acting weird, not just slow or laggy, completely off. It had us driving in circles, showed roads that didn't exist, and kept insisting we turn left into empty desert. We ignored it and kept using the paper map Aaron had brought along, mostly as a backup joke, but now it became the only thing we had. Then, in the afternoon, we saw something that made both of us go quiet for a while. We passed a car parked on the side of the road, deep in the desert stretch between nowhere and less than nowhere. It was old, maybe a 70s model Ford or Buick, faded green and coated in dust. The hood was up, the doors all wide open, but no one around. What caught our attention was that the windshield had a thick, long crack in it like it had been hit by something big. On the roof, someone had tied 3 large, worn suitcases. They were still up there, swaying slightly in the wind. "I don't see anyone," I said, scanning the area. Aaron slowed the truck and leaned forward, peering at the car. "No footprints in the dirt," he said. "Nothing. It's like they just vanished." We both sat there for a minute, engine idling. "Want to check it out?" I asked. "Nope," he said immediately, shifting into gear. "Let's not start our own horror story." We both laughed, but it felt forced. A few miles down the road, I looked back. The car was gone. That night, we camped at a small, unmarked site in a pine valley. It wasn't official, no signs, no markers, just a flat stretch of earth near a trickling stream. Aaron found it using an old trail app he had downloaded weeks ago. The moon was out, almost full, and the trees swayed quietly in the breeze. We built a fire, cooked beans and hot dogs, drank 2 beers each, and talked about everything we'd missed over the years. Then we heard it. Somewhere beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards into the woods, came a sharp snapping sound like a branch being stepped on. Then silence. We both froze. Another snap closer this time. "Could be a deer," I said. Aaron slowly set his beer down. "Or a bear." We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them toward the trees. Nothing. Just tall, straight trunks and shadows. "I don't like this," Aaron muttered. We killed the fire, packed up quickly, and slept in the truck with the doors locked. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering, faint, barely audible, like someone was standing just outside my window. I turned my head. Nothing. No people. No animals. Just darkness. I didn't tell Aaron. The third day was tense. We barely talked, both of us pretending we hadn't heard anything the night before. Somewhere around midday, Aaron made a wrong turn, and we ended up on a winding mountain road with no name. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't on the GPS. But it was paved, old and cracked, yet clearly used at some point. "This doesn't feel right," I said, staring at the road disappearing around a tight bend. "We'll turn around if it gets worse," Aaron replied, though he didn't sound convinced. We drove on. The trees got thicker, darker. The sky seemed dimmer, even though it was barely past noon. Then, without warning, the road ended, just stopped. No dead-end sign, no warning, just broken asphalt leading into an old metal gate, and beyond that, a massive, overgrown property. There was a sign hanging crookedly from a rusted chain, "St. Mary's Rest Home." It looked abandoned. Aaron put the truck in park. "No way," I said immediately. "Let's turn back." But he was staring at something just inside the gate. There was a person, an old woman dressed in a gray nightgown, standing motionless among the weeds. Her face was hard to see, but something about her posture was unnatural, rigid, like a mannequin. Aaron rolled his window down a few inches. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She didn't move. I didn't want to be there anymore. Every hair on my body was standing up. Then she twitched, just slightly. A small jerk of the head, like her neck snapped toward us. Her mouth opened, wide, wider than it should have, like her jaw unhinged. I screamed at Aaron to drive. He hit reverse and spun us around. We tore back down the mountain road, neither of us saying a word until we hit the highway again. Only then did I notice something strange on the rearview mirror. Hanging from it was a tiny silver cross on a string. We didn't own it. It hadn't been there before. That night, we found a motel in a tiny town somewhere near the Colorado border. The woman at the desk was nice enough, gave us keys to room 3, and warned us that the power sometimes flickered during storms. It wasn't storming, but the lights still flickered the whole night. Aaron fell asleep fast, but I lay awake again. Around midnight, I heard footsteps above us. Slow, steady, deliberate. But the motel only had 1 floor. I knew that for a fact. I stepped into the bathroom and turned on the faucet to splash water on my face. The mirror was fogged up like someone had just taken a hot shower. We hadn't used it. When I wiped the glass, there was a message written across the top. You shouldn't have stopped. I backed out, heart pounding, and ran to wake up Aaron. He didn't believe me at first, but when he saw the mirror, still smeared from where I wiped it, he went pale. We left within 10 minutes. We drove through the night, stopping only for gas. No more detours, no more curiosity. We were done. We arrived in Denver the next morning, exhausted, grimy, and rattled. Aaron dropped me at a rental place, and I booked the next flight home. A week later, I developed the photos I had taken during the trip. Most were normal. Shots of the desert, a picture of the broken drive-in, a blurry selfie with Aaron. But one of them made my stomach turn. It was a picture of the old rest home, the one we found at the end of the mountain road, but this time there were more people standing outside. Dozens of them, all facing the camera, all in gray gowns, all with mouths gaping wide open. I swear to God, I never took that photo. Story the end.
Story number 3.
It was late August when I agreed to drive cross-country with my cousin Jamie. Her job was relocating her from Oregon to Georgia, and she needed someone to help with the drive. I'd just been laid off and figured, why not? A free trip, a chance to clear my head, and time with family I didn't see often. Jamie promised we'd take the scenic route through Idaho, Colorado, the edge of Kansas, down into the south. Small towns, open highways, motels that still used real keys. I thought it'd be charming, something to talk about later. The first 2 days were normal. We stayed at a mom-and-pop motel outside Boise, ate greasy diner food, played music too loud with the windows down. The sun was bright, the road stretched endlessly, and for a while, everything felt uncomplicated. It changed the third night, somewhere near the Colorado-New Mexico border. We were about 6 hours behind schedule. A thunderstorm had rolled in during the afternoon and slowed us down. Our GPS lost signal when we crossed into a rural stretch of highway, the kind where you can drive for miles without seeing another car. By then, it was pitch black, except for flashes of lightning that briefly lit up the road and revealed the silhouettes of mountains in the distance. Jamie spotted a sign, old, wooden, and barely visible through the rain. Dry Creek, 5 miles. We hadn't seen a town for nearly 2 hours, and we were both exhausted. Jamie squinted through the windshield. Should we check it out? Try to find a place to crash? Sure, I said. Anything's better than sleeping in the car. The road to Dry Creek was narrow and winding, lined by tall trees that looked almost black against the storm. Our headlights barely cut through the rain, and every time thunder cracked overhead, the whole car vibrated. When we finally saw lights ahead, it felt like relief. Dry Creek looked like a town pulled from another time. A single main street with a post office, a diner, a few boarded-up stores, and a motel called the Haven Lodge. Its neon sign flickered, vacancy, in sputtering red. Jamie parked the car and ran inside while I grabbed our bags. The lobby was dimly lit and smelled faintly of mildew. An old man with a pale, weathered face sat behind the desk. He didn't smile when Jamie asked about a room. Just the 2 of you? He asked, voice gravely. Yeah, Jamie said, just for the night. He hesitated before nodding slowly. Room 6. Don't go outside after midnight. We both paused. Jamie laughed, assuming it was a joke. Because of bears or something? The man didn't answer, just handed over a rusted key on a plastic tag and looked away. Room 6 was at the far end of the motel, near a sagging wooden fence that separated the lot from a thicket of trees. The room was small but clean enough, 2 twin beds, a yellowed bathroom, and a TV that didn't work. We were too tired to care. We took turns showering and got into bed, trying to laugh off the weird warning. But sometime around 1 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I sat up and noticed Jamie's bed was empty. The bathroom door was open, light off. I checked my phone. No signal. "Jamie?" I whispered. No answer. I walked outside. The air was cold, the kind that feels wrong in summer. The rain had stopped, but a heavy fog clung to the ground. I scanned the parking lot. Our car was still there, but no sign of Jamie. Then I saw movement near the fence, a figure standing just beyond it, half obscured by trees. Still. "Jamie?" I called again. The figure turned. It wasn't her. It was a man, or something shaped like a man. His clothes were old, ripped at the shoulders like he'd been dragged through the woods. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, they were hollow, not dark, but empty, like two blank holes in his face. I couldn't move. I just stared. He didn't blink, didn't speak. Then I heard a noise behind me, Jamie's voice. "I saw something outside," she said, breathless. I went to the office, but it's empty. I turned around. She looked panicked. I pointed to the fence. "Someone's out there." We both looked. Nothing. The space beyond the fence was empty. No man, no movement. "I swear to God he was right there," I said, heart pounding. Jamie didn't question me. Her hands were shaking. "We need to leave. Now." We grabbed our things and practically ran to the car. The engine sputtered twice before starting. Jamie peeled out of the lot, the tires screeching on wet asphalt. As we drove through town, we noticed something we hadn't seen before. All the buildings were dark. Not just closed, but lifeless. No lights, no signs of power. Even the streetlights had gone out. When we reached the highway again, the fog lifted like it had never been there. Neither of us spoke for a long time. At dawn, we stopped at a gas station near a bigger town. While Jamie filled up, I went inside to buy coffee. The clerk was a woman in her 60s. Friendly, chatty. "Where are you coming from?" she asked. I hesitated. "A town called Dry Creek." She froze. Her face changed completely. "You mean the old mining town?" she asked. "I guess." "Motel called Haven Lodge, just off a small road in the woods." She shook her head slowly. "That town's been abandoned for years. Flood wiped out the lower half back in the 90s. They never rebuilt it." "I don't understand," I said. "We were just there, last night." She stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You must be mistaken." Jamie came in just as I was about to argue. I didn't push it. I couldn't. We kept driving. 2 days later, we reached Georgia. Jamie's new apartment felt safe, bright, and filled with noise from the street. But that night, when we unpacked our bags, I noticed something strange. The motel key was still in my backpack. Room 6, Haven Lodge. I didn't remember taking it. Jamie stared at it, pale. "You took that?" I shook my head. "I swear I didn't." We agreed to throw it out. I walked it to the dumpster myself, dropped it in, and didn't look back. But that night, just before I fell asleep on Jamie's couch, I checked my phone. Still no signal, just one unread message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The text said, "Why did you leave?" I didn't sleep that night, and a week later, when Jamie called me in a panic, I wasn't surprised. She said she heard someone walking outside her apartment every night around the same time, 1 a.m. But when she looked, no one was there. I told her to leave a light on, to ignore it, to pretend it didn't exist. Because I don't think whatever followed us cares if we moved. I think it just needed us to come close enough, to look at it, to know it was real. And once you know, you never really leave Dry Creek. Story the end.
Story number 4.
3 years ago, I took a road trip with my brother Nick and two of our closest friends, Jordan and Sarah. We had been planning the getaway for weeks. Just a simple week-long loop through the Pacific Northwest, no tight schedules, no hotels booked ahead, just a tent, sleeping bags, and the open road. At the time, we thought it would be one of those carefree adventures you look back on and laugh about. None of us knew how far from laughter we'd end up. We started in Portland and planned to loop around through rural Oregon, hitting Crater Lake, then dipping into Northern California before circling back. It was late September, right when the trees started to change and the air had that early bite of fall. We packed light, but took enough food and water to stay off the grid for a couple days if needed. The first few days went by like any other camping trip. We stayed at a small campground near Umpqua National Forest, drank cheap beer around the fire, told the same dumb stories we always told. Everything was normal. But by the fourth night, we were deep into the lesser-used forest roads, taking a path Nick found on some online hiking forum. It was supposed to lead to a remote clearing with a view of a hidden lake. Unlisted on maps, but well worth the trip, according to one anonymous commenter. The road itself was narrow and gravelly, barely a lane wide. Trees pushed in from both sides like they were trying to reclaim the road entirely. We were in Nick's SUV, which could handle a bit of rough terrain, but after nearly an hour of driving, we all started to get uneasy. The road got bumpier, the trees thicker. We hadn't passed another car in over 2 hours. No cell signal, no signs, nothing. And then, just as the sun started dipping behind the trees, we came to a fork. There were no markings, just a split, one path veering left downhill, the other curving gently uphill to the right. Nick stopped the car and asked what we thought. Jordan leaned forward from the back seat and pointed to the right. That incline's dry, less muddy. I'd go that way. We agreed. Nick turned the wheel and followed the right path, driving slowly to avoid large rocks and potholes. We made it maybe half a mile when the forest opened up into a clearing, just as promised. And there it was, still water reflecting the orange-pink sky, a small lake cradled in the middle of nowhere. It was beautiful in the way only untouched places can be. We parked near the edge of the woods, set up camp, and decided to stay there for the night. The weirdness started slowly. The first thing was the silence, not just quiet, complete stillness. No insects buzzing, no frogs, not even the wind rustling the trees. We joked about it at first, called it nature's mute button. But as the night went on, the silence became suffocating. We could hear each other breathing. Every shift in the sleeping bag sounded like thunder. Around midnight, Sarah shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I sat up, heart thumping. The other two were still asleep. I listened carefully. At first, nothing. But then I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. Splashing, like someone stepping gently into the lake. Then the sound of water being slowly moved. Ripples. Barely there, but consistent. We got out of the tent together and looked out over the water. Nothing. Moonlight reflected off the glassy surface. No movement. We stood there for a full minute, just watching. Then Sarah pointed. "There," she said. And I saw it too, a ripple, small, in the center of the lake, and something else just under the surface. Dark, moving slowly. Not a fish. Bigger. It circled once, then vanished. We went back inside. Neither of us slept well. By morning, Nick and Jordan were already up, building a fire for coffee. They said nothing weird happened overnight, and we didn't bring up what we saw. No reason to freak them out. We ate, packed up, and decided to push further along the road. We thought it would eventually connect to a logging trail that led back to civilization. We were wrong. An hour into the drive, we found the road completely blocked by a fallen tree. Massive, fresh, like it had come down within the last day. Nick backed the SUV carefully and turned around. We figured we'd just head back the way we came. But when we returned to the fork in the road, something was off. The split was still there, but neither direction looked like the way we had come. The ground was different, trees in different places. We checked the GPS again, but we were still in the dead zone. No signal, no map. We tried the left path this time, the one we had ignored the day before. It led us back to the lake. Not just another lake. The same lake. Same shape. Same curve of shoreline. Even the half-burned log from our fire was still there, cold and gray. The weirdest part? It took us over an hour to get back here, even though we had driven away from it that morning. We all got out, walking around in circles, trying to figure it out. Nick swore it was impossible. I kept turning left, he said. Every time. We should have been heading south. Jordan kicked a rock and said it out loud. We're lost. And then things started escalating. That night, we didn't bother with a fire. None of us felt like eating. We set up the tent again, but sat outside it for hours, just listening, waiting. The silence was worse. It pressed against our eardrums like pressure underwater. Just after 1 a.m., we heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, crunching leaves, coming from the tree line. We froze. None of us spoke. The steps circled the tent, but never approached. Just kept moving in a wide arc like whoever, or whatever it was, didn't want to be seen. Then came the breathing. Slow, heavy exhales. We all heard it. Nick gripped a flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. He shined the light into the woods. There was nothing there, not even animals scurrying away. Then the air shifted. Cold swept in so fast that our breath turned visible within seconds. It had been in the 50s earlier, not cold but not freezing. Now it felt like winter had swallowed us whole. Jordan stood up too fast, panicking. We have to go. Now. We grabbed what we could, left the tent and sleeping bags, and piled into the SUV. Nick turned the ignition. The engine started, but the headlights were weak, flickering like dying candles. He put it in reverse, then drive, and we started moving again. But we weren't on the same road anymore. The gravel road was gone. Now it was dirt. Narrow, almost claustrophobic. Trees leaned inward, their branches scraping the sides of the SUV. Nick cursed under his breath and kept going. We drove for what felt like hours with no end in sight. None of us spoke. At some point, we passed an old cabin, or what was left of one. Just a foundation and a crumbling chimney. Sarah begged Nick to stop, but he refused. Something about that place felt wrong, worse than the lake. Worse than the steps in the woods. Then we saw them. Figures on the side of the road, standing still, not moving, not walking, just watching us pass. They looked human, sort of. Thin, ragged. Some wore old-style clothing, like from the 1800s. Others looked soaked, dripping wet, even though there was no rain. One woman had her mouth open, but no sound came out. We sped up. Nick hit a bump so hard the tires left the ground. Sarah screamed. I looked back. The figures were still watching. That night, we found a pull-off just large enough to stop and rest. No one wanted to camp. We locked the doors and stayed in the SUV. I must have dozed off because I jolted awake to tapping on the glass. 3 slow taps on the rear window. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing there. Then the tapping came again, this time from the driver's side. Nick sat up, panicked, fumbling for the flashlight. But there was nothing, just darkness. The taps never came more than 3 at a time, always slow, always soft. We drove again before dawn. Eventually the road changed. Asphalt returned. Then a rusted road sign. Welcome to Bear Hollow. Pop 31. It wasn't on the map. No bars on the phone. But there were houses, small, run-down. A single gas station with ancient pumps. We pulled in. Nick ran inside to ask for directions. An old man behind the counter gave him a map and told him to follow the north trail to get to I-5. Just as Nick turned to leave, the old man said, "You came from the lake, didn't you?" Nick froze. "Yeah. How'd you know?" The man didn't answer. Just looked at him and said, "Don't go back." We followed the directions, reached the interstate by afternoon. Cell signal returned. We didn't talk much the rest of the ride back to Portland. When we got home, we looked up Bear Hollow. No such town existed. Not officially. The zip code Nick remembered from the receipt at the gas station pulled up a blank spot on the map. Just forest, no buildings, no population. 2 months later, Sarah stopped speaking to us. She moved away, changed her number. Jordan won't talk about the trip. At all. He acts like it never happened. Nick drinks more than he used to. He hasn't been in the woods since. And me? I hear things sometimes. Late at night, tapping, always 3. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I had never really believed in ghosts. Not in any serious way. Sure, I liked scary stories and movies as much as anyone else, but when it came to real life, I figured everything had a rational explanation. That changed during the summer of 2017, when my girlfriend Emily and I took a road trip through the Appalachian Mountains. We were living in Baltimore at the time, both on summer break from grad school, and decided to spend a week driving through the back roads of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The idea was to disconnect, avoid the touristy stuff, and explore the forgotten corners of the country. We'd planned a mix of camping and staying at cheap roadside motels. Neither of us had a big budget, and we thought that added to the adventure. The first few days went smoothly. We camped at Blackwater Falls, visited some caves in Kentucky, and stopped in a couple of towns that looked like movie sets from the 1950s. Most of these places were nearly deserted. Just empty gas stations, boarded-up diners, and the occasional convenience store with a single clerk who looked surprised to see customers. It was on our 5th day while driving along a winding 2-lane road just west of the Daniel Boone National Forest that things started getting strange. We were trying to reach a small campground Emily had read about online. The directions weren't very clear and GPS had gone spotty a while back. I remember seeing a hand-painted sign nailed to a tree that said, "Wilder's Fork, 6 miles." It wasn't on our map, but Emily was excited about it. She'd found some blog post where someone said it was beautiful, quiet, and almost always empty. The road narrowed as we drove deeper into the woods and eventually turned to gravel. We passed no other cars, no houses, just thick forest on either side. The sun had dipped low by then, filtering orange through the branches. Around 7:30 p.m., we came upon a fork in the road with no signage at all. We took the right path, mostly because it looked slightly more traveled, and after about 15 more minutes, the trees opened up into a small clearing with a half-collapsed wooden sign that read, Wilder's Fork. The campground looked abandoned. There were 4 or 5 old picnic tables, a rusted-out fire pit, and a single wooden outhouse. No cars, no tents, nothing. Just silence and the sound of cicadas. "I guess it really is quiet," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Emily smiled but looked uneasy. "It's something, isn't it?" We set up the tent near the edge of the woods, boiled some ramen on our camp stove, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But as the sun went down, something about the place started to gnaw at me. The air felt charged, still. Not like the usual night sounds you hear when you're camping. No frogs, no owls, just the distant chirring of bugs and a faint rustle from the trees as if the woods were breathing. Around 11 p.m., as we were lying in our sleeping bags, Emily sat up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I hadn't. "What was it?" "Sounded like someone walking around the camp." I sat up too, my ears straining. For a long moment, I heard nothing. Then, very faintly, I caught it. The crunch of dry leaves. Not like an animal scurrying. This was slow, deliberate. Footsteps. I grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was nothing there. No animals, no people. Just dense woods. We didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard the sound again. Walking, always circling, always just far enough away that I couldn't quite place it. Emily barely spoke. In the morning, we packed up quickly and got back on the road. We both agreed not to stay in another campground that remote. We found a diner about an hour south and tried to laugh it off over pancakes and coffee, but something still felt off. Our next stop was supposed to be a small town called Harrow's Mill. It was marked on the map and supposedly had a general store, motel, and even a small museum about coal mining. We got there around noon, but the place was almost completely empty. No cars, no people. The store was closed. The museum looked abandoned. The only place open was a single gas station on the edge of town. The clerk barely looked up when we walked in. "Y'all just passing through?" he asked without making eye contact. "Yeah," I said, "just looking for somewhere to grab lunch." He paused, then said, "Don't linger long in Harrow's. Most folks don't stay." The way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We left without finding any food and drove another hour south to a place called Cold Hollow. The motel there was a single-story L-shaped building with a flickering sign that just said, "Rooms." We were exhausted, so we decided to stay the night. The man at the front desk was in his 60s, with thick glasses and skin like old leather. He gave us the key to room 9 without a word and watched us as we walked to the car. The room was small but clean enough. Wood paneling on the walls, a green carpet, 2 twin beds, no TV. The window faced a patch of forest that ran along the back of the property. That night, Emily woke me up around 2 a.m. She was standing by the window, trembling. "There's someone in the woods," she whispered. I got up and walked to the window. The forest was dark, the kind of deep black you only get in rural areas. But then I saw it, a flicker of white, like fabric moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, but then it stepped forward into a shaft of pale light. It was a woman, barefoot, wearing a long dress, her face pale and blank. She stood there, staring directly at us, then tilted her head slowly to one side, as if curious. We backed away from the window. I wanted to call the police, but we had no cell signal. Emily was crying. I grabbed the room key, ready to go to the front desk and demand help, but when I opened the door, I froze. The hallway was filled with fog, thick, choking fog that had no business being there inside the building. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. I took one step forward, and then I heard it. A voice. It sounded like someone whispering in my ear, even though no one was there. A woman's voice, soft and angry. "Don't go." I slammed the door shut and locked it. Emily was backed into the farthest corner of the room, her knees pulled to her chest. Neither of us slept. When the sun finally came up, the fog was gone. The woman was gone. Everything looked normal. We ran to the car, hearts pounding, and drove for hours without stopping. That day, Emily started getting nosebleeds. She'd never had them before. I started seeing things in the mirrors, just glimpses. A pale face in the back seat that would vanish when I turned around. At one point, our car radio turned on by itself, blaring static, and the voice came through again, so clear, like someone sitting in the passenger seat, "You shouldn't have come." By the time we reached Knoxville, we were both a mess. We checked into a busy hotel near downtown and finally got a decent night of sleep. For a while, we thought maybe it was all in our heads. Maybe stress, isolation, exhaustion. It all had a way of messing with your perception. But the next morning, there was a message written in the condensation on our bathroom mirror. One word: stay. We hadn't showered yet. Emily left the next day, took a bus back to Baltimore. We were supposed to finish the road trip together, but she said she couldn't take it anymore. I stayed behind to return the rental car and fly home later. That night, alone in the hotel, I saw her again. The woman from the woods. She was standing by the foot of my bed, hair hanging wet over her face, her feet dirty and torn. She didn't speak this time. She just stared, and then she smiled. That smile broke something in me. I left the hotel at 3 a.m., drove to the airport, and caught the earliest flight I could find, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. It's been years, but I still see her sometimes. In windows, in mirrors, in the reflections of bus shelters and dark puddles. She's always there watching, waiting. Emily won't talk about what happened. She moved out of state, changed her number, and blocked me on everything. I can't blame her. I don't take road trips anymore. I haven't driven through the Appalachians since that summer. But sometimes, when I'm alone late at night, I hear her footsteps outside my apartment, slow, steady, circling. And I know one day, I'll open the door and she'll be standing there. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The trip was supposed to be just a quick getaway, a break from the grind of everyday life. Me, my best friend Derek, and my girlfriend Ava decided to take a road trip through the Pacific Northwest. We had been talking about it for months, planning stops at quirky little towns, picturesque national parks, and, of course, the Pacific coastline. It was supposed to be a trip full of good conversation, laughs, and maybe a few adventures along the way. Instead, it became something I still can't quite explain, something I wish I could forget, but can't seem to shake off. We set out from Portland, Oregon, heading south on Route 101, the iconic highway that hugs the Pacific coastline. The weather was perfect. Crisp air, blue skies, and the smell of the ocean carried on the wind. The drive was beautiful, with the waves crashing against the rocky shore and the trees towering high above us, their green canopies casting shadows over the winding road. We were excited, in good spirits, and completely unaware that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Around midday, we came across a sign for a small town called Cedar Hollow. It wasn't on our planned route, but the map showed it was only about an hour off course. Ava suggested we take a detour and check it out. "We might find something interesting," she said with a smile. "It'll be fun." Derek, always up for something offbeat, agreed immediately. "Why not? It'll be an adventure." So we turned off the highway and followed a narrow road that seemed to lead us deeper into the forest. The further we went, the less we saw of civilization. No other cars on the road, no signs of life. It was quiet, eerie even, as if the world had been swallowed up by the towering trees on both sides. I remember thinking that it felt like the kind of place where you'd expect a creepy old house to pop up out of nowhere. After about 20 minutes, we finally reached the town. Or what was left of it. Cedar Hollow looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. The buildings were old, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. There was a diner on the corner, but it looked like it hadn't served a meal in years. The streets were empty, and the only movement came from the wind, which made the trees creak and rustle in a way that seemed almost unnatural. A strange, heavy silence hung over the town, as if it were holding its breath. "This place is creepy," I said, already regretting the decision to stop. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this uneasy feeling in my gut. Ava, ever the optimist, jumped out of the car with a grin. "Come on, don't be such a buzzkill. Let's go check it out." Derek followed her, shrugging. "I'm in. Maybe we'll find some cool photos for Instagram." I hesitated, but eventually got out too. As we walked down the main street, I noticed that even though everything was run down, there were still remnants of life. Old newspapers left in doorways, an overturned bicycle on the sidewalk, a half-empty flower pot outside one of the houses. It felt like the town had been abandoned in a hurry, as if everyone had just walked away one day and never returned. We wandered around, taking in the strange atmosphere. There was no sign of anyone living there, but there was something unsettling about the place. It was as if the town itself was frozen in time, caught between the past and the present. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just an old forgotten place and that we'd be fine. But then something happened that made me question that. We reached the old church at the edge of town, its steeple rising high into the sky like a looming presence. The doors were cracked open and a faint light flickered from inside. Ava, ever curious, pushed the door open and stepped inside without hesitation. Derek followed right behind her, but I stood there for a moment, feeling a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Something about the church didn't sit right with me. "Are you coming?" Ava called from inside. Reluctantly, I stepped inside. The interior of the church was dark, with only a few rays of sunlight breaking through the stained glass windows. The pews were covered in dust, and the air smelled stale. But what really caught my attention was the altar at the front. There was a strange, heavy wooden cross hanging above it, but it wasn't like any cross I'd ever seen. It was twisted, almost like it had been warped by some kind of unnatural force. The walls around it were covered in symbols I didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly as if alive. Ava was already at the altar, running her fingers along the old wood. "This place is so cool," she said, her voice echoing in the empty church. I didn't share her enthusiasm. "Ava, we should probably go. This place is giving me the creeps." Derek, who had been snapping photos, nodded. "Yeah, this place is definitely weird. Let's head out." Just as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. Ava jumped, and Derek cursed under his breath. We rushed to the door, but no matter how hard we pulled, it wouldn't budge. "Shit! What the hell?" Derek shouted. I tried to stay calm, but the feeling of dread that had been building up in me intensified. The air in the church grew colder, and I could see my breath now, even though it was a warm day outside. "That's not funny," I said, looking at Ava. "Open the damn door." But she didn't answer. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was staring at the altar, frozen in place. "Ava," I asked, moving closer to her. "What's going on?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Look." I followed her gaze, and my heart dropped into my stomach. The cross above the altar was moving, slowly creaking as if some invisible force was shifting it. The air grew thicker, heavier, and the symbols on the walls began to glow, casting an eerie light that made everything feel wrong. My legs started to feel weak, like they were made of rubber. Suddenly the cross stopped moving, and there was a sound, a low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere deep within the church. It was like the sound of a beast awakening from a long slumber. My blood ran cold. And then we saw it. At the far end of the church, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, its form obscured by the dim light, but I could make out the outline of something inhuman, long, spindly arms and legs with eyes that glowed faintly like embers in the dark. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't human. Ava screamed, her voice high-pitched and terrified. Derek tried to rush for the door, but it was still locked. I turned back to the figure, feeling paralyzed by fear. It took a slow step forward, its eyes fixed on us. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, grabbing Ava's arm and pulling her toward the door. But just as we reached it, the figure let out a sound that was more like a hiss, followed by a deafening roar. The door rattled violently, as though something huge was slamming into it from the other side. Panic set in. We were trapped. I don't remember much after that, just a blur of panic and adrenaline. All I remember is the feeling of cold hands grabbing me, pulling me away from the door, and the blackness that followed. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the church, the others beside me. The doors were wide open, and the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in a warm glow. It was like the nightmarish presence had never been there at all. We stumbled out of the church, shaking and confused. We didn't speak a word as we rushed back to the car. The town was still as dead as before, but it felt wrong, like it was watching us, waiting for us to leave. We drove away without looking back. We never spoke of Cedar Hollow again, but the memory of that place haunts me to this day. Every time I think about it, I feel that same cold fear creeping up my spine. I'm not sure what we encountered in that church. Maybe it was some sort of ghost or something much darker. But I do know this: some places are better left undisturbed, and some roads should never be traveled. Story the end.
Story number 7.
I've always loved road trips. The freedom, the open roads, and the idea of discovering places off beaten path was something that brought me comfort. So when my best friend Claire suggested we take a trip together, I jumped at the chance. We hadn't seen each other in months due to our hectic work schedules, and this felt like the perfect way to reconnect. Claire had this spontaneous streak in her that I admired, and the idea of a road trip from Los Angeles to the Pacific Northwest sounded perfect. We decided to take the scenic route, avoiding major highways, and stick to back roads. No GPS, no maps, just the open road and the adventure ahead. We packed up her old Jeep Cherokee, crammed it with camping gear, food, and enough playlists to last us for days, and hit the road. The first day went off without a hitch, nothing unusual. We stopped in little towns, visited quirky roadside attractions, and just enjoyed the thrill of being on the road again. But by the third day, things started to get strange. We were somewhere in Northern California, deep in the forest, when we realized we had gotten off track. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and the small dirt road we had been following seemed to lead to nowhere. Claire, being the more confident of the two of us, convinced me we were fine. "We'll find a place to camp soon," she said. "We'll figure it out." So we pressed on. The forest was dense, the trees tall and ancient, blocking out most of the fading light. It felt like we were driving into the heart of nowhere. As we wound through the narrow, winding road, we noticed a strange fog beginning to settle over the area. It was thick, almost unnatural, like the kind you see in movies when something ominous is about to happen. But we didn't turn around. Instead, we kept going. We hadn't seen another vehicle for what felt like hours, and when we pulled over to stretch our legs, the silence was almost oppressive. It was so still, so quiet, that even the birds had stopped chirping. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Let's just get back in the car," I suggested, suddenly feeling uneasy. This place is giving me the creeps. Claire rolled her eyes, clearly not as disturbed by the atmosphere. "You're being dramatic. It's just a fog. Let's find a campsite and get some rest. You'll feel better in the morning." I reluctantly agreed, and we drove on, deeper into the woods. But as we drove, I began to notice something odd. The trees weren't just trees anymore. They looked like they were closing in on us, as if they were shifting positions, leaning toward the road. I kept my thoughts to myself, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling gnawing at me. But the longer we drove, the stranger it became. After a while, we came to a small clearing, and Claire decided it was as good a spot as any to camp for the night. We set up our tents quickly, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that lingered in the air. I kept hearing faint rustling noises from the trees, but every time I looked, there was nothing there. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire and tried to relax. The crackling of the fire was the only sound breaking the silence. The fog had thickened around us, and the night felt colder than it should have. Claire tried to keep the mood light, telling old stories and cracking jokes, but I could tell she was starting to feel the weight of the place too. We didn't talk about it out loud, but I think we both knew something was off. The stillness, the fog, the strange feeling that we weren't alone. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. But we stayed. Neither of us spoke the words, but I think we both felt the pull to stay put, like the forest was holding us in place. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside our tent. At first, I thought it was Claire getting up to use the bathroom, but when I turned over, she was still sound asleep next to me. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing around the campsite. I held my breath, straining to hear over the thudding of my own heart. The footsteps circled the tent a few times, then stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a soft whisper, just loud enough for me to hear, came from outside. "Go back." My blood ran cold. The voice was low, gravelly, almost like it was coming from the earth itself. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was frozen in place, listening to the rustling of leaves as whatever it was moved away. I wanted to wake Claire, but something stopped me. I didn't want her to hear it. It felt like if I spoke, I would invite whatever it was in. Instead, I lay there, holding my breath, straining to hear anything else. But the forest was silent again. Slowly, I forced myself to close my eyes, hoping it was just my imagination. The next morning, I told Claire about what happened, but she just shrugged it off. You probably just heard an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But I didn't believe that. I had heard the whisper. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. We packed up quickly and got back on the road. The fog was still heavy and the air felt thick. The road ahead seemed endless, and the feeling that something was wrong continued to gnaw at me. We drove through the day, but as the evening approached, we found ourselves back on a deserted stretch of road. The same one from the night before. This time, it felt different. I recognized the trees, the strange narrowing of the road, and the sense of being trapped. I didn't want to say anything to Claire, but I could feel my anxiety creeping up again. Maybe we should find somewhere else to stay tonight, I suggested, trying to sound casual. Claire didn't even look up from the road. We're fine. I'm sure we'll find a place soon. We kept driving. As the evening wore on, the fog began to return. The thick, suffocating fog. The trees looked the same as they had the night before, almost like they were closing in on us again. It felt like the world around us was narrowing, and I could feel my breath growing shallow. The silence was overwhelming. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the road ahead. A man. He was standing in the middle of the road, just staring at us as we approached. His clothes were tattered, his hair wild, and his face was pale, almost sickly looking. There was something wrong with his eyes. Sunken, dark, almost hollow. Claire slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as we came to a halt just inches from him. I felt my heart racing in my chest. Jesus Christ, what the hell? Claire shouted, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at us with those empty eyes. He was so close I could feel the air growing colder around him. I wanted to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the man had frozen time itself, and all I could do was stare at him, unable to look away. Then, without warning, he slowly turned and walked off the road into the fog, disappearing into the trees. "Go, go!" I screamed, my voice panicked. Claire didn't hesitate. She slammed the truck into gear and sped off, not looking back. We drove for miles without saying anything, the only sound the tires humming on the road. Eventually, the fog began to thin, and the feeling of being watched started to fade. But the terror remained. We didn't speak much for the rest of the trip. The rest of the road trip passed in silence, and when we finally made it to our destination in Portland, I didn't feel the same sense of relief I expected. The memory of that man, the way he stood there, motionless with those hollow eyes, haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had encountered was still following us. The strangest part was when I checked the photos on my camera the next day. There was a picture of the road, the fog, and a blurry figure standing just off to the side. But it wasn't the man we'd seen. This one was different, taller, darker, with a wide, unnatural grin that I hadn't noticed when I took the photo. We never spoke of the incident again. It was like we both tried to forget about it, to pretend it never happened. But every now and then I wake up in the middle of the night and I can still hear that whisper, just faint enough to make me question whether it was ever real. Story the end.
Story number 8.
We were just a few days into our road trip when things started to take an unexpected turn. My best friend Lily and I had always talked about going on a cross-country adventure, just the two of us. We were both in our late 20s, had some time off work, and decided it was the perfect time to do it. No plans, no set destinations, just driving and seeing where the road took us. Our route took us south from Chicago through the small, forgotten towns of Kentucky and Tennessee, eventually making our way toward the deep woods of Arkansas. We had rented a car, packed up our bags, and loaded up the playlist, eager for the kind of adventure that only a road trip can bring. The first few days were picture perfect. Sunny skies, endless highways, and the promise of new experiences. But on the fourth day, things began to shift. It started with a detour. We had planned to take the interstate, but when we saw a sign for a scenic route that promised beautiful views of the Ozarks, we couldn't resist. The map showed a little town called Millfield tucked away off the main highway, and we decided to stop for a meal and stretch our legs. It was small, but charming in a way that felt out of time. The streets were quiet, the buildings old, but well kept, and there was a quaint diner in the center of town that promised good food. As we parked in front of the diner, something about the town felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like the place was frozen in a moment that had never moved forward. People walked around slowly, their eyes cast downward. They didn't seem rude, but there was a strange distance between them and the rest of the world. It was as if they were caught in a quiet, distant trance. Lily noticed it too. "This place feels odd, right?" she asked, locking the car doors behind us. "Yeah," I said, my unease rising. "Yes, maybe it's just the vibe, you know? Small towns like this can feel a little isolated." We shrugged it off and walked into the diner. The inside was just as old-fashioned as the rest of the town. Wooden booths, a jukebox that was probably last used in the 80s, and a waitress who looked like she hadn't aged in decades. She smiled as we sat down, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "What can I get y'all?" she asked, her voice too calm, almost monotonous. We ordered quickly, just a couple of sandwiches and iced teas, and tried to keep the conversation light. But every time I looked up, I noticed the same strange figures outside the window, walking past with slow, deliberate steps. They never turned to look at us. "I'm starting to feel like we're in a movie or something," Lily muttered, shifting in her seat. "You know, the kind where you realize too late that the town is hiding something." I laughed nervously. "I think we just need to get back on the road. Maybe we'll be out of here before it gets dark." That was the plan, anyway. When our food came, the waitress didn't leave it on the table. She set it down quietly, then stood there, staring at us. "Y'all planning to stay the night?" she asked, still not blinking. Lily glanced at me, clearly uncomfortable. "No, just passing through," she replied. The waitress nodded, but there was a moment of hesitation before she spoke again. "You should be careful then. Not many people come through Millfield these days, and most of them don't leave." That struck me like a cold slap to the face. I looked at Lily, who had gone pale. She was clearly as unnerved by the woman's words as I was. Before we could respond, the waitress turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. "I'm starting to think we should just leave," Lily whispered. "There's something wrong about this place." I agreed. The unease that had been creeping up my spine was now full-blown dread. We didn't even finish our meal. We paid quickly, grabbed our bags, and walked out into the dimming afternoon light. As we passed the diner's large windows, I could have sworn I saw more people inside, watching us. We hurried back to the car, barely speaking, and started the engine. The air felt heavy as we drove, the sun slipping lower behind the mountains. Millfield was fading behind us, but that feeling, it didn't go away. Something was wrong, and it lingered, gnawing at my thoughts. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to nerves. But I could still feel the weight of the townspeople's eyes, like they were waiting for us to do something. We didn't talk much as we continued down the road. The highway started to twist into more isolated stretches, and the landscape around us became dense with trees. The sky was darkening rapidly, and soon there were no more signs of civilization, just the endless stretch of trees on either side. We hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. Then, as if the road itself was leading us to something, the car's headlights flickered. "That's weird," Lily muttered, tapping the dashboard. "It's never done that before." Before I could answer, the engine sputtered and died, rolling us to a stop in the middle of the road. Panic surged in my chest. I tried starting the car again, but it just clicked and died. Nothing more. "Great," I muttered, reaching for my phone. No signal. Of course. We got out of the car, hoping to get some help or at least find a place to call roadside assistance, but all I could see was more forest. It was nearly completely dark now, the kind of darkness that presses against you. The trees seemed to close in, their shadows stretching out across the road. "Let's just walk back toward Millfield," Lily suggested, her voice shaky. "There must be someone there who can help." I didn't want to go back, but I had no choice. The walk back to town felt endless. The forest around us was quiet, too quiet, not a single sound, No rustling of leaves, no crickets, just silence. The only noise came from our footsteps, and even they felt muted, as though the ground itself was swallowing us up. By the time we reached Millfield, the town looked completely different. The streets were shrouded in shadow, and there was no sign of life. The diner, the lights, everything was dark. The town looked abandoned, empty, almost as if time had stopped. My heart began to race. There was no way this place had been this desolate when we left. "Are we sure this is even the same place?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my voice tight. "But something's not right." Suddenly, the streetlights flickered on, and I caught a glimpse of someone standing at the end of the street. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, motioned for us to come closer. Without thinking, we both moved toward it, but as we got closer, we realized this person wasn't alive. Their face was pale like wax, and their eyes were sunken and hollow. The figure took a step toward us, and I felt a chill run through me, a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. "Get out!" it rasped, voice like dry leaves scraping together. "Get out before it's too late." I didn't wait to ask questions. I grabbed Lily's arm and pulled her back, dragging her away from the figure. We ran. It didn't matter where, as long as it was away from that thing. We found our way back to the car, and somehow, against all odds, it started. We didn't stop until we were miles away from Millfield. The sun was coming up when we finally reached the nearest town, and we pulled into a gas station, trembling. The woman behind the counter looked at us, concerned. "You all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I swallowed hard. "We were just in Millfield. There's something wrong with that town." She paused, her expression unreadable. "You'd be the first to say that." We didn't go back to Millfield. We drove straight through, never once glancing in the rearview mirror, and I never forgot the face of that figure, or the strange warning. To this day, I don't know what it was we saw that night, but I do know this. There are places that aren't meant to be visited, places that are better left forgotten. Millfield was one of those places. Story the end.
Story number 9.
It started as just another road trip, one of those spontaneous adventures that you take when you're young, full of life, and convinced that nothing can go wrong. My friends and I were fresh out of college, all of us eager to escape the confines of our hometown for a while, to drive aimlessly and take in the sights. We packed up my old Jeep, a car that had seen its fair share of road trips, and set out to explore the less traveled parts of the country. Our destination was vague, just a route planned around old unmarked highways, small towns, and the occasional landmark. We had no reservations, no tight schedules. It was meant to be an easygoing, free-spirited trip. There were 4 of us, me, Alex, Sarah, and Ben. We had known each other for years, ever since high school, and even though we had drifted apart after graduation, this trip was our way of reconnecting. The plan was simple. Drive for a few days, stay at odd places, enjoy the scenery, and share stories and laughs. Little did we know, this trip would take us into places far darker than any of us anticipated. The first few days were uneventful. We drove through the Midwest, chatting and laughing, getting lost on back roads, stopping at dive bars, and taking pictures of obscure roadside attractions. It was the kind of trip that people always talk about, the kind that becomes part of your favorite stories for years to come. But on the 4th day, things started to change. We were deep in rural Kansas, somewhere between Wichita and Topeka, when we decided to take a detour through some back roads to avoid the interstate traffic. We found ourselves on a winding country road, surrounded by flat farmland and fields that stretched for miles in every direction. The road was desolate, and the only signs of life were the occasional rundown house or farmstead. We were heading to a small town called Hollow Creek, a place we had read about in a local guidebook. It was described as a quiet, almost forgotten town, tucked away between the larger cities. The sun was beginning to set as we approached the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The road was getting narrower, and the trees that had lined the edges of the field seemed to grow closer, their branches casting long, eerie shadows across the road. It felt like we were entering a forgotten place, one that had been untouched by time. There was something unsettling about it, but none of us could put our finger on what it was. As we reached the town's entrance, the first thing we noticed was how eerily quiet it was. There were no people walking the streets, no cars parked along the road, not even the usual sounds of animals or birds. It was as though the entire town had been swallowed up by the silence. The buildings were old and dilapidated, with boarded up windows and peeling paint. The streets were cracked and overgrown with weeds. It looked like a ghost town, but it wasn't completely abandoned. There were a few houses with lights on, but no one seemed to be out and about. We pulled into a small, rundown motel on the edge of town. The sign above the door flickered as if struggling to stay lit, and the parking lot was empty, save for a couple of old, rusting vehicles. Sarah, always the adventurous one, was the first to get out of the car. "This place looks perfect," she said, trying to make light of the unease we all felt. "Let's check it out." We followed her inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the air stale and musty, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The woman behind the counter was old, her hair wispy and gray, and she gave us a long, appraising stare as we approached. She didn't smile, just nodded slowly as we asked for a room. "We've got a vacancy," she said, her voice raspy. "You'll want room 4. It's the last one available." There was something off about the way she spoke, but none of us said anything. She handed us the keys, and we made our way to the room. Room 4 was a small, dimly lit space. The furniture was old, the carpet stained, and the walls seemed to sag under the weight of time. It was uncomfortable, but we were tired, and the idea of moving on didn't seem appealing. We decided to settle in for the night, even though the atmosphere felt off. It wasn't long before we noticed something strange. Around midnight, when the rest of the town was completely silent, we began to hear faint noises outside our room, soft footsteps like someone walking in the gravel parking lot. But when we looked out the window, no one was there. At first, we assumed it was just the wind, or maybe an animal wandering through. But the footsteps continued, every few minutes growing closer to the door. I stood up to check, but there was no one in sight. Ben, who had always been the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's probably just some old person on a late-night stroll. You guys are overthinking this." But then, around 2 a.m., we heard something different. A faint tapping on the door. It wasn't the kind of knock that someone would make if they were looking to enter. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone testing the door to see if it would open. We all froze, the room suddenly feeling much colder than before. Sarah walked over to the door and peered through the peephole. "There's no one there," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's just empty." I felt a chill run down my spine. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely audible. But none of us moved. We just sat there in the silence, listening as the tapping continued. After what felt like hours, the tapping stopped. We waited for a while longer, but the sound didn't return. Finally, we decided to sleep, though none of us really got any rest. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside felt amplified, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning, we left the motel as soon as we could, eager to get back on the road. But something still lingered in the air. The town, Hollow Creek, felt wrong, like we had crossed some invisible boundary, and once we were inside, there was no way out. As we drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the town in the rearview mirror. It was still there, as silent and empty as before, but there was something else, something I couldn't place. A figure standing in the window of one of the houses, watching us as we left. We didn't talk much during the drive. The sun was high in the sky now, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. We passed through a few more small towns, but none of them felt like Hollow Creek. Nothing felt that wrong again. That was the last time I saw any of them. After that trip, we all went our separate ways. Sarah moved out of the country, Ben stopped keeping in touch, and Alex got a job in another state. None of us ever mentioned the trip again, but the dream started. Every night without fail. I was back in the motel room, listening to the tapping on the door. Sometimes I could hear someone breathing on the other side. Sometimes I could hear footsteps on the gravel again, always getting closer. And every time I looked out the window, there was no one there. I've tried to move on, to forget about that trip, but the memories of Hollow Creek haunt me to this day. I've heard rumors since, stories about the town, about people who drive through and disappear, never to be seen again. The strange thing is, no one seems to know where the town is. It doesn't show up on any map, and when I tried to look it up online, I found nothing. But every so often, I'll get a letter or a strange call from someone I used to know asking if I've heard of Hollow Creek. And every time, I know deep down that I'll never be free of it. Story the end.
Story number 10.
It was supposed to be an unforgettable road trip. Just me and my best friend Tom taking the scenic route from Chicago to Denver. A break from the routine, a change of scenery, and a chance to recharge. We packed the car, fueled up, and hit the open road, excited about the adventure ahead. We had no strict plans, just a general direction, and the open road was our guide. The first few days were perfect. We drove through small towns, stopping at odd roadside attractions, grabbing greasy diner food, and laughing about old memories. The journey was everything we had hoped for, lighthearted and carefree. But it didn't take long for things to start feeling off. It was on our third night that the weirdness began. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and after driving for what felt like hours through an endless stretch of empty highways, we started to notice how isolated the area was. It was nearing dusk, and the last stretch of road we had been driving down was long and desolate. The next town, a place called Greenfield, was a good 40 miles away. Neither of us felt like driving that far, and there were no motels in sight. "Let's just find somewhere off the road and camp for the night," Tom suggested, his voice a little tired. I agreed. The sky was turning purple and orange, and it seemed like the perfect time to pull over. We found a small, dusty side road that led to a patch of dirt and scrubby grass. It was quiet, too quiet. I don't know how else to describe it. The wind barely moved the tall grass, and the occasional chirp of crickets seemed to fade as soon as it reached our ears. We set up our tent, made a small campfire, and cracked open a couple of beers. As we sat around the fire, talking about the places we wanted to visit, I noticed something strange in the distance. A single light, very faint, appeared on the horizon. I thought it might be a truck or another car, but it didn't move. It was just there, hovering. "Look at that," I said to Tom, pointing. "What do you think that is?" Tom squinted in the direction I was looking. "It's probably just some weird reflection. No big deal." But as we continued talking, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The light didn't look like any car headlight I'd ever seen. It was more like the light from a lantern has flickering. It wasn't the usual kind of light that would be found on a highway. Something about it felt wrong. As the night grew darker, the temperature dropped, and we climbed into the tent. We didn't speak much after that, both of us feeling increasingly uncomfortable for no clear reason. We tried to sleep, but something kept us awake. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft noise, like something scraping the dirt outside the tent. I chalked it up to an animal, but it was unnerving. I'd drift off for a few minutes, only to be jolted awake by a loud snap of a twig nearby. Around 3 a.m., I was wide awake, staring up at the ceiling of the tent, trying to ignore the sense of unease gnawing at me. I could hear Tom's steady breathing beside me, but something else had caught my attention. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking around our camp. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps came closer, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Tom," I whispered urgently. "Tom, wake up." He stirred, groggy. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside." He blinked at me, still half asleep. "What? There's no one out there, man." "I swear I hear footsteps," I insisted, my voice low. Tom gave a low groan, and after a moment of silence, I heard him unzip the tent. "Let's just check." I followed him outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down to embers, casting an eerie glow across the dark landscape. We stood there for a while, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no sounds, just the quiet hum of the night. "See?" Tom said, rubbing his eyes. "You were imagining things." But I wasn't convinced. I had felt it. Someone or something was out there. The unease was growing, and I couldn't shake it. We crawled back into the tent, but neither of us slept well. Every few minutes, I'd hear another twig snap or something shuffle outside. Tom kept muttering about how he had a bad feeling too, but neither of us wanted to admit it aloud. In the morning, we packed up camp quickly and got back on the road, eager to leave the weirdness behind. But even as we drove away, the oddness lingered in the air. We didn't speak much during the drive. Both of us were deep in our own thoughts. We stopped for gas in a small town called Westerly, about an hour or so away from where we'd camped. I grabbed a coffee and tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had followed us. Tom was quieter than usual, and when we started talking to the cashier, we noticed she seemed off. She didn't look at us directly, her eyes constantly darting to the door or the window, as if she was waiting for something. "You two traveling long?" she asked, her voice tight, almost strained. "Just a road trip," I said, trying to sound casual. "Heading to Denver." She gave a tight smile. "Well, be careful out there. You'll be fine, but not everyone who comes through these parts is the same." I thought I misheard her. "What do you mean?" She blinked, almost as though she was surprised I'd asked. "Oh, some folks don't make it out of these parts. Not everyone is who they say they are." Tom and I exchanged a look, but before we could ask more, the woman had turned away, retreating to the back of the store. We left the gas station quickly, both feeling the weight of her words hanging in the air. The town felt wrong. It was too quiet, too deserted, the kind of place you'd drive through without a second thought, except now it felt like we weren't supposed to be there. As we continued down the highway, the feeling of being watched never went away. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, endless and barren, with nothing but dusty fields and the occasional dilapidated building. The farther we drove, the more isolated we became. Then, a couple of hours later, we reached another stretch of road that was almost identical to where we'd camped the night before. It was a narrow two-lane highway, surrounded by miles of empty land. No cars, no signs of life, just us and the road. But something was different. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it. The atmosphere had changed again. It was like the air had thickened, pressing down on us. I don't know how long we had been driving when Tom suddenly slammed on the brakes, making me jerk forward in my seat. "What the hell, man?" I exclaimed. Tom's eyes were wide. "Did you see that?" I looked around. There was nothing, just the empty road stretching ahead. But then, in the distance, I saw something moving in the trees. A shadow, a figure. It wasn't a person. It was too tall, too thin. Its limbs seemed unnaturally long. It was standing still at first, but as we got closer, it began to move, slowly, jerking its body at odd angles, like it was struggling to walk. I felt my stomach churn. Drive now. Tom's foot was already on the accelerator, but the figure kept following, moving along the edge of the road. I could feel its presence, even though we were speeding away. It was still there, watching, and I swear I saw its head twist unnaturally toward the car, its eyes glowing with an eerie yellow light. We didn't stop until we reached the next town. We barely spoke the rest of the way. When we finally made it to Denver, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I didn't tell Tom everything I had seen in the rearview mirror, the way the figure's silhouette had blurred as if it were never really there. I didn't have to. He knew. We never spoke about that road trip again. Neither of us ever went back to that stretch of highway. And to this day, I can't help but feel like something is still out there, watching, waiting, following, just beyond the horizon. Story the end.
Story number 11.
It was supposed to be an easy, fun road trip. Just the three of us. Me, my sister Claire, and my best friend Jake. We had spent months planning this trip down the coast, driving from Seattle to San Francisco, taking the scenic route along Highway 101. It was late summer, and everything seemed perfect. The sun was shining, the windows were down, and we had a playlist full of our favorite songs to set the mood. There was nothing that could have prepared us for what we would encounter on that road. We started out early in the morning, and everything felt light and carefree. We passed through small towns, stopped at quaint roadside diners, and made jokes about the oddities we saw along the way. Those strange little shops with quirky names and dilapidated motels that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 60s. We didn't think much of it. We were on a mission to get to the coast, to enjoy the beauty of the ocean, to relax. Around midday, we stopped at a little town called Crescent City. It was off the beaten path, but seemed like a nice place to stretch our legs and grab some lunch. We found a small cafe by the side of the road, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and tables, and a faint smell of coffee in the air. The waitress, a woman in her late 40s, greeted us with a smile and led us to a table by the window. As we ate, the conversation naturally turned to the road trip itself. Claire was always the talkative one, asking everyone in sight about the best places to visit or things to do. Jake, ever the cynic, was making jokes about ghost stories he had heard about small towns along the way. I had always dismissed his stories, chalking them up to overactive imaginations or creepy legends. But as he spoke about strange disappearances in rural towns or bizarre sightings on lonely stretches of highway, something about the conversation began to take on a different tone. After lunch, we decided to head out again, but as we left Crescent City, we took a different route, one that was more remote. There was a long stretch of road that wound through dense woods, and the thought of exploring it intrigued us. Claire was eager for the adventure, while Jake was hesitant, his usual sarcastic remarks about the weirdness of small towns now replaced with a noticeable tension. The road became narrower, the trees thicker, their shadows darkening the path ahead. There was no sign of civilization. No gas stations, no other cars, just miles and miles of empty forest. It was peaceful at first, almost calming, but as the miles stretched on, an odd stillness settled in, the kind that made the air feel thick and heavy. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. That's when we saw it. At first, it looked like a car parked on the side of the road, but as we approached, it became clear that something was off. The car, an old sedan, was abandoned, its paint chipped and faded. It looked like it had been there for years. But the most disturbing part was the way it was positioned, off the road, angled in a way that didn't make sense, as if it had been placed there deliberately. There were no tire tracks in the dirt, no sign of anyone who had recently been there. Jake slowed down, his eyes narrowing as he studied the car. "We should check it out," he said, his voice almost too quiet. Claire, ever the curious one, agreed almost immediately. Yeah, maybe there's something cool inside. I wasn't so sure. My gut was telling me to keep going, to ignore the strange car, and just get back to the main highway. But I didn't speak up, and before I knew it, Jake had pulled off the road and parked beside the sedan. Claire was already opening the door before I could protest. The moment we stepped out of the car, I felt it. A chill in the air, colder than it should have been for a summer day. The silence was suffocating. No birds, no insects, just an unnatural quiet that pressed in on us. We approached the abandoned car cautiously, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and my palms began to sweat. Claire walked up to the driver's side door, peering inside the cracked window, her face lit with excitement. "It's empty," she said, turning to us with a grin. "Nothing but old newspapers and some trash." Jake was leaning against the hood, his arms crossed as he scanned the woods around us. "This is a little weird, don't you think?" "Maybe someone just left it here," I suggested, though even I wasn't convinced. But then we heard it, a voice. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. It sounded like a woman's voice calling out, though the words were too distorted to understand. "Did you hear that?" Claire asked, her eyes wide with confusion. I nodded, suddenly feeling uneasy. "Yeah, it sounded like someone's calling for help." Jake straightened up, his face suddenly serious. "There's no one around here. We're miles from the nearest town." I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, but there was no movement, no sign of anyone else. My heart began to race. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. Claire glanced nervously at the woods, her curiosity clearly giving way to fear. "Okay, this is starting to feel off. Maybe we should go." I agreed, but as I turned to head back to the car, I noticed something strange. The sedan's trunk was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it stood out. A cold, uneasy feeling washed over me as I approached the trunk, my footsteps slow and deliberate. When I opened it, I immediately regretted it. Inside was a bundle of old clothes, but beneath them there was something else. A large, tattered blanket, and underneath that, a bundle of what looked like old newspaper clippings. I pulled the clippings out, and as I unfolded them, I felt my stomach drop. They were articles about missing persons, different names, different dates, but all from the same area, the same stretch of highway we were on. I slammed the trunk shut, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to leave. Now. Jake was already halfway to the car, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, let's get out of here. We didn't say much as we piled back into the car. The air in the car felt different, colder. The same eerie silence had followed us back onto the road, and the further we drove, the more the tension in the car grew. The voice we had heard earlier still echoed in my mind, along with the unsettling feeling that we weren't alone in those woods. It felt as though we were being watched by something that didn't want us there. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the sun setting behind us. The road ahead seemed endless, the darkness closing in around us. But then, just as I thought we were safe, we saw it. A figure, standing by the side of the road, a woman dressed in old tattered clothes, her face obscured by long tangled hair. She was just standing there, staring at us as we drove past. Jake slammed on the brakes. What the hell was that? We all turned to look, but when I looked back out the rearview mirror, the woman was gone. Completely gone. Drive, I whispered. Jake didn't hesitate. He floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road as fast as we could. But the feeling of being followed didn't leave. It was as if that figure was out there, watching us from the trees, just waiting for us to stop again. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, and by then, the last remnants of daylight had disappeared. We found a motel and checked in, but none of us slept. Every little noise, every creak of the building made me jump, convinced that something was out there, something that had followed us from those woods. The next morning, we left as quickly as we could, not saying much about what had happened. We didn't need to. We all knew what we had experienced was real, something we couldn't explain. And to this day, I can't shake the memory of that abandoned car, the missing persons, the voice calling out to us, and the figure in the woods. Whatever it was, it wanted us to stay. And somehow I don't think it's finished with us yet. Story the end.
Story number 12.
We had been driving for hours, the monotonous hum of the tires on the highway doing little to ease the growing tension in the car. The trip was meant to be a fun getaway, a road trip through the southwestern United States, just my brother Ryan and I. We had planned this trip for months, dreaming of seeing small towns, national parks, and the kind of rugged beauty only found in the desert. But as the sun began to set on that third day of our trip, things took a strange turn. It all started when we decided to take a detour from the main highway. We had been following the GPS, which suggested a scenic route that promised to lead us through a little-known ghost town, one that hadn't been inhabited for decades. Ryan, always the thrill seeker, was excited at the thought of exploring a ghost town. He had seen too many horror movies, and part of him was hoping for a supernatural encounter, or at least a creepy experience. I, on the other hand, had some reservations about the detour, but I didn't want to be the boring one who slowed down the adventure. We left the main road and entered a dusty, narrow highway that seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape around us was desolate, endless fields of dry grass, dead trees, and rocky outcrops. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the barren land. It felt eerie, like we were driving through some forgotten corner of the world. After an hour or so of driving, we spotted a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Ashford." It was barely legible, and the paint was peeling, but it was enough to confirm that we had arrived at the ghost town. The road narrowed even further, and the pavement gave way to gravel, crunching beneath the tires. We slowed the car down, rolling cautiously toward the town. As we approached the town, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it was. There were no sounds of birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just an unnerving silence that seemed to suffocate the space. The buildings that lined the dirt road were crumbling, their wooden exteriors weathered by time and neglect. Some of the houses had collapsed entirely, while others stood precariously, barely supported by rotting beams. I glanced at Ryan, who was grinning excitedly, but I felt my unease grow. "We should get out and look around," Ryan suggested, his eyes wide with anticipation. I hesitated. "Are you sure? It's kind of eerie here." "Come on, don't be such a buzzkill. This is what we came for." He was already unbuckling his seatbelt, practically jumping out of the car before I could respond. Reluctantly, I followed him, though my nerves were getting the better of me. We both grabbed our cameras and started walking down the main street, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. It felt as though we were trespassing on something ancient. something long forgotten by time. The buildings, though empty, seemed to whisper secrets to anyone who would listen. We ventured deeper into the town, passing abandoned shops and homes that were now little more than skeletons of their former selves. Ryan was practically giddy, snapping pictures of every crumbling wall and rusted object he came across. I, on the other hand, had my camera raised half-heartedly, more focused on the unsettling feeling that seemed to be growing with every step. The wind picked up, sending a chill through me. I could feel my skin prickling with the sensation that we were being watched. "Hey, look at this," Ryan called out, drawing my attention to a house at the far end of the street. It was larger than the others, with a wide porch and a set of stairs leading up to a creaky wooden door. Unlike the other buildings, it seemed to be in slightly better condition, though still in a state of decay. The windows were covered in grime, but there was something about the house that seemed alive, as if it was waiting for us. "Let's go inside," Ryan suggested, clearly eager for an adventure. I hesitated, my stomach tightening. "I don't know, man. It doesn't feel right." "Oh, come on. It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" he joked, already starting up the steps before I could protest. Reluctantly, I followed him. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing a dusty, dimly lit interior. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and old wood. I could barely make out the outlines of furniture in the gloom, and the floorboards creaked under our weight as we stepped further inside. I had a sense that something was wrong. There was an oppressive weight in the air, something that felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. Ryan, of course, was oblivious to my unease. He was already snapping photos of the interior, laughing and joking as he explored. I stayed close to the door, my eyes scanning the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else in the house, watching us, though I couldn't see anyone. "Hey, Ryan, let's go," I said, my voice tight. "This place gives me the creeps." He didn't respond at first, but I noticed that his movements had slowed. He was standing near the back of the house, low, his camera lowered, his expression unreadable. "Ryan?" I called again, stepping closer. He slowly turned to face me, and when he spoke, his voice was strangely hollow. "Do you hear that?" I frowned, listening. At first, all I could hear was the wind rustling outside and the creaking of the house. But then, faintly, I caught a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like someone whispering in the next room. I couldn't make out the words, but there was no mistaking the tone. It wasn't friendly. "Maybe it's just the house settling," I said, trying to reassure myself. Ryan didn't look convinced. He took a few cautious steps forward, as if drawn toward the sound. "I'm going to check it out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ryan, don't," I pleaded, my anxiety rising. "This isn't a joke. Let's just get out of here." But he didn't listen. He disappeared into the next room, and I was left standing alone in the dark hallway. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I took a step forward, but before I could move any further, I heard a loud crash from the other room. "Ryan!" I shouted, my voice trembling. I rushed into the next room, my mind racing with 100 possibilities of what could have happened. The room was empty except for a shattered lamp on the floor, but there was no sign of Ryan. I called his name again, panic rising in my throat. The house seemed to close in around me, the air thick with an oppressive silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, I heard the whisper again, only this time it was clearer. It was a voice, soft but unmistakable. "Leave. Now." I froze. The voice sounded so close, like it was coming from just behind me, though I saw no one. "Ryan," I called, my voice cracking. Suddenly I heard his footsteps in the hallway, but when I turned to look, no one was there. I felt my heart skip a beat as the temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath, a thin mist of air escaping my lips. I backed away from the hallway, my eyes darting around in a panic, and then, just as quickly as it had started, the coldness disappeared, replaced by unbearable heat. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't wait around to find out. I ran out of the house, back onto the street, and I didn't stop until I reached the car. I fumbled for my keys, desperate to get away. I didn't care about Ryan anymore. I just needed to leave. As I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking, I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. The car was dead. I looked up at the ghost town, and for the briefest moment, I saw something in one of the windows of the house. a figure standing there, watching me. My heart hammered in my chest as I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in frustration. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, too terrified to move. It wasn't until the sound of tires screeching on gravel reached my ears that I dared to look up. It was Ryan. He was driving toward me in a cloud of dust, the Jeep's headlights blinding in the darkness. He skidded to a halt beside me, the door flying open. He looked pale, his hair wild, his eyes wide with fear. "Get in," he yelled, his voice frantic. "We need to leave now." I didn't ask any questions. I didn't care. I threw the car into gear, and we sped away from that cursed town as fast as we could. We never spoke of what happened in Ashford. We didn't have to. Whatever was in that town, whatever we had disturbed, was still with us. We could feel it, a presence that never fully left, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next time we made the mistake of returning. Story the end.